Welcome everyone for another episode of our Invisible InCourage podcast, hosted by the Invisible Disabilities Association. My name is Wayne Cannell, and I'm the founder and president of Invisible Disabilities. We're so excited for you to be here. What's really awesome is coming up in this month of May here, we're going to be hosting our first ever Invisible Disabilities Walk and Roll. That's a time for you to walk and roll and ride and skateboard and roller skate and roll your wheelchair and use a walker, whatever it takes, go hiking, biking, and to honor and support and to remember your friends and family who live with an invisible disability. And one of the things that we're doing this year is we're bringing together what we call our walk and roll legends. These are people who have done incredible feats, but why do they do these feats? And we're going to be talking with today with Colonel Chris Kolenda. We're very excited. He is a warrior-diplomat. He really combines assertiveness, statesmanship, and wisdom to help his clients have dramatic wins. He's a West Point graduate, internationally renowned combat leader, a retired Army colonel, and he was a trusted advisor to many four-star generals and secretaries of defense, and just what an incredible background. And so I really want to invite and welcome today, Chris, welcome.
Wayne, thanks for having me on your program.
Now, we're just so thrilled to have you today. So share a little bit more about your background. Take some time. We'd love to learn more about what's your day-to-day life that you do. And you can start with your background if you'd like to. I mean, what got you, why a colonel, any of those backgrounds we'd love to hear.
Oh, well, the Army had a sense of humor. It just kept promoting me.
Oh, is that what it is? Great.
Well, I was, you talk about invisible injuries and disabilities. I was bullied in high school very badly. And I had no intention of going into the military or going into West Point. But my parents, like, you're gonna, who didn't know any of this is going on, by the way, wanted me to apply to the different academies. So I applied to Army and Air Force. I liked Army. And then I think it was the day I graduated high school, I get a phone call. And it was from the senator's office saying, "Oh, you've been appointed to West Point. Will you go?" And my 17-year-old brain was like, well, if I don't go, I'll always wonder what it was like. And if I had it, could I have made it? If I go and I don't like it, then I can always leave. So, okay, yes, I'll go. And I just thrived there. And I had an open mind about the military too, and staying as long as I was having fun. And I thought that, I didn't ever want anybody to have to go through what I went through. And so I thought that if I can lead my organizations in ways that the most vulnerable people felt that they were valued and felt that they could be their best selves. And then later as a consultant, if I could help other leaders make sure that the people who are most vulnerable in their organizations too could be their best selves, could contribute their best, then I think I was doing some good. So I didn't ever want anybody to feel like I did. And if I could encourage leaders to help others contribute their best and feel confident doing so, then I think I'm doing a bit of good for the world.
Well, that's awesome. So how long were you in the actual, because I know you're retired now. So how long were you in the military and what are you doing right now?
Yeah, I was in the military for 24 and a half years, and to include commanding leading a group of about 800 paratroopers in Eastern Afghanistan in 2007 and 2008 as a 15-month deployment to one of the most dangerous and deadly places in the country. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that because it directly affects the, this 1,700-mile bicycle ride and the foundation. And so
and that's jumping out of planes, right? Jumping out of planes.
Yeah, paratrooper. So,
oh my goodness.
Yeah, that was extraordinary experience. And then I wound up being a senior advisor to several four-star generals, Secretary of Defense, being the Secretary of Defense's representative in talks we were having with the Taliban back in 2010, 2011, 2012. Our unit was the only ones, to my knowledge, to have motivated a large insurgent group to stop fighting and to switch sides. And so that kind of got a reputation. And so they asked me to help with these talks with the Taliban, these early talks, and potentially seeing if there's a way to bring the war to a successful conclusion. So I thought I had these 2 once-in-a-lifetime opportunities: take a senior command in the Army or do this work representing the Secretary of Defense in the talks. And so I thought, well, the first one would be a lot more fun. Second was probably how I can better serve. So I resigned, I declined that command. I retired from the Army and did that work for the Secretary for about 2.5 years. And then resigned in 2014 after another deployment to Afghanistan and started my own consulting business. And what I do is I help CEOs achieve big goals in the simplest ways possible.
Yeah. So what is that? I mean, big goals in the simplest way possible, right? Instead of like overcoming all odds, it sounds like breaking it down, right?
Yeah, I mean, the way our brains are wired, if something looks too hard, too complicated, too risky, we just don't do it. And so you've got a lot of consultants that like to maybe overcomplicate things to show how smart they are. And they wind up just not having much impact because for the client, it's like, yeah, well, okay, but I don't see how I could possibly execute this. I learned this lesson the hard way. I was advising one of the 4-star generals in Afghanistan about corruption in Afghanistan, which was undermining everything that we were trying to do. And so I created a little anti-corruption science project, and his sort of eyes glazed over on me, and he looked at me and he said, Chris, I understand the importance of this, but I can't possibly see how we can even get started because it was just too darn complicated. And what I learned from that was you've got to be able to break things down to their essence and communicate in ways that people see that, okay, this is doable. I see what we have to do to tackle this big problem or to achieve this big goal.
Yeah. So I think about that in the whole realm of people living with disabilities. I mean, the reality is, I think about my wife, Sherry, and she's been unable to work. She's been disabled since 1991 and, more majority of her life. And, it has to be broken down to the simple, right? I mean, the reality is highly complicated when you're dealing with illness and disabilities and those things. But, so you have to break everything down. You have to keep track of everything. I mean, she's got a medical journal for at least the last 20 years that I'm aware of. And every day she writes in it because you don't know if this treatment helped or that treatment helped or, which doctor to go see, all those things. And so, I think that's a huge aspect of people just trying to learn that and not making it so complicated. And, it's a day-to-day thing, right? I mean, I would guess in the military, you have to plan in advance, but you got to get through the day, right?
Well, right. And so by breaking things down into their, getting them down to their essence, then you can start to chart a way forward. So one of the things that I'll talk about with organizations is like conflict management. Organizational conflict can only be about one of two things: goals or ways to get there. Everything else, personality conflicts or whatever, that's unprofessional. But when you boil down any organizational conflict, it's going to be about what are we trying to achieve with a particular effort, particular policy, et cetera. And then what are the ways to get there? So your goal is, or your conflict is only going to be about one of those two things. So the first thing you do is, okay, do we agree on the goal? And if we don't agree on the goal, then, well, let's find out who the decision maker is to clarify the goal.
Right.
And then once you got agreement on the goals, then really the controversy is about ways to get there. ways to get to your destination. And then you can start working with that. That's the exact approach that we took with dealing with some of these insurgent groups, was just figuring out ways to find common objectives. Right. And then once we found common objectives, you could work on ways to get there. But the problem is, if you don't break it down like that to something that simple, then people start talking past one another. Some people are talking about goals. Some people are talking about ways. Some people are talking about what's and whys. Other people are talking about hows, and you get a nightmare. So just making things simple like that, it allows people to focus their attention and to get on the same page. And once you're on the same page, then a lot of things are possible.
Well, I think about listening, and we'll talk some about that, but really that listening and validating what people, where they're at, that simple thing is a huge part of it. So, one of the reasons why we have you is, we're calling you a legend, and you're like, now what does that mean? Well, rock and roll legend, that's somebody who's actually, you do something amazing. And one of the things that people struggle with disabilities is they see these people, that they see them in the advertisements or whatever. Hey, so-and-so's got such and such illness, and they run an Ironman triathlon, or they climb Mount Everest, but the majority of people are not able to do those things in a lot of cases. And their Ironman triathlon may be getting through each day, or making it through the next treatment, dealing with whatever they're dealing with. So, but I wanted to really understand, you did an amazing feat, okay? You got on your bike and you rode a long ways, okay? And kind of, if you could tell us a little bit about that, and ultimately, why did you do that, right? We know it wasn't like, oh, hey, I just needed to get in shape, so I'm just going to go ride, 18,000 gazillion miles or whatever, to share with us about what you did, and really what drove you to do that, and what's the backstory? Because you talked about being bullying. Well, bullying is a lot of times because people prejudge and they don't understand what people are going through, and so they don't treat them right. And that happens all the time with people with invisible disabilities, because you can't see their illness, and you think, well, there's nothing wrong with them, so they just want attention, all these different things that people say. Right. That are not helpful. So just share with us about what's the honor ride?
Yeah. I mentioned the 15-month deployment with this group of 800 paratroopers. And what they did out there, was something historic, but it comes at a cost. We had 6 of our members of our unit killed in action. And of course, dozens wounded. And we were coming up on 2022 is the 15th anniversary of the start of that deployment. And I wanted to do something significant to honor, to kind of mark that occasion. So we had a 10-year reunion, and I thought 15 years, I want to do something that really to mark that occasion. And for me, that included visiting the graves of each of the paratroopers who were killed in action, being able to spend time with their families and just pay my respects. And the way that, everybody has their final resting place. One is buried in Nebraska. Chris Pfeiffer's buried in Nebraska. Adrian Hike's buried in Iowa. Jacob Lowell's buried in Indiana. Jacob Lowell in Illinois. Ryan Fritchie in Indiana. Dave Boris buried in Pennsylvania, and Tom Bostic is at Arlington National Cemetery, just outside Washington, D.C. So when you put all that together, it's about 1,700 miles.
Wow.
And so I thought, well, I can drive the distance. I can drive to each site. To me, that just wasn't significant enough. I could physically walk the distance, but it would just take way too long. And I got a business to run. I put food on the table. I've got a family, I need to see. And so I thought, I know what I could do. I bet I could pedal a bicycle 1,700 miles. People ride cross country. I would be able to do 1,700 miles. The only problems were that I didn't own a bicycle. I hadn't ridden a bicycle in 20 years. And so I thought, all right, well, if I'm going to do this is April of 2021. Now, if I'm going to do this, I need to invest in a road bike. I need to get professional support. hire a cycling coach to get my butt in shape. And then I need to start telling people so I don't chicken out. And that was exactly the process I used to reach this big goal. Make a significant economic investment, buy a nice road bike, get the professional support by hiring a cycling coach, and then just start letting people know for the accountability. And so I trained probably, it was over 10,000 miles in preparation for it. And I started out on September 25th of 2022 in Spalding, Nebraska, which is where Chris Pfeiffer rests in peace. And it was the 15th anniversary of the day he died of wounds. And so his parents were there. His wife, Karen, was there. And, when Chris died on September 25th of 2022, he'd fought for his life for a month after being mortally wounded at a place called Camp Keating. And he fought for his life for a month in San Antonio at the military hospital there. He died September 25th. The next day, Karen went into labor. She was 9 months pregnant. And the day after that, their daughter Peyton was born. So Peyton never met her dad. She was there too at the start and at the finish. They were both at the finish. And so being able to talk to Peyton a bit about her dad, and just being there with Chris's parents and Karen and Peyton was, it was a really special way to start the ride. Peyton, by the way, became our first scholarship recipient. So she's a whiz kid. She's got like a 4.25 grade point average, I think, in high school, and is well on her way to college.
Wow. Well, I think about even your ride and your prep. It's when somebody gets diagnosed with an illness, right? We'll talk a little bit about that with the veterans with PTSD or traumatic brain injury, those things.
Right.
Exactly what you just said is what needs to happen, but it doesn't normally. You need a cheering crowd around you. You need people that are going to hold you accountable in the sense of, hey, I'm here to help you. How can I help you? Right? Stepping up and doing that. You got to learn the route, right? You got to learn what doctors work, what doctors don't work, what medicine works, what organizations can you find support from, all those things of taking that journey, that you have to do. And so that's kind of thing you really prep for. And so kind of talk about how, with veterans, what that looks like, because coming back, obviously you're honoring these six men who gave their lives. But there's a lot of them that come back who they didn't give their lives over there, but they end up doing things over here in the sense of how the toll on them. And if you want to talk a little bit about what that looks like and how you've been able to kind of support in that area too.
Right. Well, first I'd like to address this first thing you mentioned, which is, nobody does anything significant alone. There's all this mythology about the lone wolf or whatever. Well, lone wolves starve. That's exactly what happens to lone wolves. They starve.
Right.
Nobody does anything significant on their own. And for me, it was my wife, Nicole, my family encouraging me, my cycling coach, my videographers and / support vehicle drivers, Seth and Dominic. Dee Dee and Jen, part of the foundation. All of that was vital. And then all of the, this sort of group of people who were just supporting me along the way. You've got people who met with me at each of the sites, people like Joel Herman, who kind of had my back all the way through the state of Iowa, providing an escort for me. Just a small example.
Sure.
So you've got to have the right support network around you. I think there are three kinds of people in the world that we meet. There's sappers, trappers, and zappers, with the alliteration. So sappers are people that suck your energy away.
Sure.
So they're the awfulizers, the catastrophizers, the trauma dumpers. People who just seem to suck the life out of you. You of course want to avoid them. The second group you want to avoid are the trappers. So they're people who want to trap you in amber. They love you just the way you are, and they don't ever want you to change. They don't ever want you to grow because they're comfortable with this version of you. And you've got to break out of that. The third group of people are the zappers, and these are the people you want to surround yourself with. These people who give you energy, who encourage you, who help you be the best version of yourself. And that's the group you want to surround yourself with. And so I was fortunate to have a bunch of zappers in my life who constantly gave me energy. So I think this point about surrounding yourself with the right crowd is absolutely vital to anybody who wants to accomplish a big goal. And that big goal may be just getting through the end of the day.
Right.
Or it could be something,
Sure. One of the difficulty things you'll find is a lot of people with invisible disabilities is that everybody has left them. They're the ones that they've been abandoned. I mean, reality is, having an invisible disability is not about, people say, well, you just want attention. Usually it's the opposite happens. Everybody leaves. Nobody wants to talk to you anymore. There's people just, they don't know how to handle it. And part of that, though, is I think about, as you're talking about being a soldier, is we need to learn to step up in the mess, right? As you talked about, even on your race, you mentioned the gentleman who was with you in Iowa, right? I mean, I'm sure it was perfect weather the whole time. It was just beautiful across all the states, and you never had any problems and everything. But somebody's got to step and be willing to sacrifice in a sense of to be with you. And we find that so many oftentimes that people are abandoned and lost, and and that happens especially with, you think about the veterans who have come back and they're dealing with PTSD, and you look at them, you're like, oh my goodness, you ran into battle. You're not afraid of anything. They can't even go outside, or they can't go in a crowd, or they can't, right. they don't know how to handle adversity at home. And so they don't even know how to ask for help. Right. And so we need people to get messy in there, get in that messiness with them and be part of it. And I like to say, don't let busy be a 4-letter word, right? Don't abandon your friends and family because of what they're going through. They need you most, not just in the first 90 days or whatever. They need you for the long haul.
Yeah. You may leave the war, but the war doesn't leave you.
Yeah.
And I call it post-combat stress. We all have it. When you are in a situation like we were for 15 months, I mean, you're going to have post-combat stress. The question is, do you let your past control you? That would be a disorder. Do you control your past? That would be normal. Post-traumatic stress, normal. Do you use your past to help you soar to new heights? That would be post-traumatic stress growth. I was riding across the Missouri River, and I noticed that river, along with many other rivers in America, is a glacier-cut river. And when the glacier back in the Ice Age moved through that terrain, it changed it permanently. It cut a deep groove, that's the river. It created a kind of a floodplain where you can grow stuff, and it pushed the ground up on either side, to create these heights. And I thought, combat's a lot like a glacier that moves through somebody's life at a high rate of speed. And it changes you. You're different when you come out of that. And the question is, what part of that different are you going to be? If you're in the water and you're just drifting, if you allow yourself to drift, I mean, you can only drift in one direction, and that's downhill. Only drift downhill. Therapy can sometimes get you out of drift, and up onto the ground where you can grow. But it can't necessarily, therapy alone can't keep you out of returning to drift. You've got to find new purpose and belonging and well-being. And that's what gets you to stay in growth and ultimately to soar to new heights, to build on those past experiences. And so part of I had a lot of time to think, of course, during the 1,700-mile ride. And that was one of the things that came to me, in terms of how you how you deal with these experiences, how you deal with, the war that never leaves you. And I find just by framing things in that way, post-traumatic disorder, your past controls you, post-traumatic normal, stress normal, you're in control of your past. It's still there.
Right.
You just accept it. And then post-traumatic stress growth, how do you build on that to achieve new dreams?
Yeah, and like you said, the way you're going to do that is it is with help, right? We aren't an island unto ourselves. We do need the support of our friends and family, and to understand that, and and so as you finished up that bike ride and you talked to you thought about I mean, it changed you too, right? I mean, obviously that was a big part of it too. You're out there to really honor and remember, and that's what we're really trying to do in this walk and roll-a-thon. Is really let's honor people, and their journeys, right? Let's remember them, and that's what you were doing out there, remembering people that had lost their lives. And we think about there's a lot of veterans that lose their lives when they come back, and that's a huge part of it. I mean, obviously with the suicide rate and a lot of other reasons why they develop chronic illnesses and stuff that they didn't have before, and how life just really beats us up a lot. I mean, I always say the most abnormal people who run my Ironman triathlons. The rest of us are normal.
Right.
I mean, it takes a special kind of person to climb Mount Everest, right? I mean, it's not, most of us are not running out doing that. And it is that each day that we kind of work through that. And so that's what really we're trying to do, is just say, hey, you know what? Living with invisible disabilities and chronic illness, those are actually part of normal life. Those are things that, eventually we're all going to be impacted before we leave this planet. I mean, we're going to come across those things, and we're not alone. That's one of the things we're always trying to share. Our mission at IDA is to encourage, educate, and connect, right? And this is a big part of that education we're doing right now. It's a connection. You got to have connection, and you got to be able to encourage somebody to keep making it each day. So, the name of our podcast is called InVisible InCourage Podcast, and we spell encourage as InCourage. And so really want to know what gives you courage personally each day to get through the day. I mean, think about it. We just went through a pandemic. Some people are still dealing with this. There's a lot of craziness in our world right now. I mean, you've been in combat. What's that thing that gives you courage just to make it through the day? Not the week or the month or whatever, but how do you do it today?
One of the things that you mentioned was, with the invisible disabilities. I mean, post-traumatic stress is certainly one of those, and people don't understand it very well.
Right.
And I mean, within our own unit, our group of 800, we've now lost more to suicide and overdoses than to enemy fire. I mean, 22 veterans reportedly die by suicide daily. That doesn't count overdoses.
Yeah.
Since 9/11, 7,500 service members were killed in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. In that same period of time, over 30,000 veterans died by suicide. It's staggering numbers. We've got people among our 800 who are thriving, who are doing really well. We've got a lot who are entering midlife and dealing with those sort of midlife struggles.
Sure.
And we've got some who are really at high risk. One of our best leaders back in 2007 lives in a dumpster in Northern California as a meth addict. And he's one of several stories. And I thought, I can't know this is happening with people who had my back for 15 months and not try to do something about it. And so part of the bike ride is about honoring the dead, but it's also about serving the living. So awesome. We established a foundation called the Saber 6 Foundation in honor of our 6 paratroopers. And the goal of it is to, we raised funds for the 800 surviving members and their families to achieve new dreams. One of the challenges that veterans have post-combat is, happiness follows you according to many psychological studies. At the top of the U on one side is like your early 20s, and the top of the U on the other side are your early 60s. The bottom of the U is like age 47. And when I look at the demographics of the people that we served with, most of them are approaching the bottom of that U. So they're kind of 35 to 43 is the average age. Old people, the older people like me have already gone through that. And so if we can kind of help people understand what it's like going through that, maybe more people are going to stay alive and thrive. So you've got most of our troopers were at the top of the happiness curve when they're in combat. And so you're already predisposed there towards, this is a great time of my life. And then you're in combat. You have just tremendous sense of purpose. I'm defending my country against people who attacked us on 9/11. This intense sense of belonging. The person to my left and the person to my right, they get me. They've got my back and I've got theirs. And you have this feeling that 300 million Americans want you to be successful.
Right.
And then you leave that at some point and you're getting older. So you're traveling down the happiness curve. You leave that and you get out into the real world. And it's like, and this sense of purpose is just not the same. And nobody gives you the tools to find purpose in your life. Unless you got a good coach. Most people, they just not given the tools to find new purpose. So it just doesn't feel the same. Making the buck, punching a time clock or whatever. That's not the same as defending your country, when you're surrounded by this sort of external purpose. So finding it for yourself is a real challenge. And then a lot of people feel like, nobody out here gets me. Nobody's got my back. In fact, some people are trying to stab me in it. So you've lost a sense of belonging, don't necessarily know how to get it back. And then you're like, nobody knows how to help me. And these feelings can send you into drift, and into depression, which becomes the gateway into suicide, self-harm, substance abuse, et cetera. And so for us in the foundation, this purpose, belonging, and well-being are like the keys to helping people get through this period, and soaring to new heights.
Awesome. Well, so share with us about how can people learn more about your story and your foundation and those things. If you can let us know how they can. I know you're an author of some books and stuff like that as well, but where can they find out more information about you and your foundation?
So for the foundation, go to saber6foundation.com. Okay. That's SABERSIX foundation.com. And you'll be able to find out all about the foundation and the honor ride and the things that we're doing. And then you can also go to my website, chriskolenda.com or strategicleadersacademy.com, and find out more about the helping people achieve big goals in as simple as possible ways. And my books, Leadership, the Warrior's Art, and Zero-Sum Victory, What We're Getting Wrong About War. That last one looks at the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and Vietnam, and what are the common errors that we're making that are increasing the risks that these wars turn into disasters. Sure.
Well, we so appreciate you being today on this, and for joining us as a walk and roll legend on our InVisible InCourage podcast. We look forward to hearing about your next journey and adventure out there. Riding 10,000 miles and then going out and riding another almost 1,800 miles. Like I said, that passion to do that, your passion to help veterans with PTS and traumatic brain injury and their families. Being caregivers, that's a really hard thing as well, and it's supporting the caregivers and the people who've lost the trauma they go through. So we're so thrilled that you did that, and thank you so much for being on the InVisible InCourage podcast.
I appreciate you having me. Thank you so much, and thanks for what you're doing.